Have you ever had that rare experience, that numinous experience, that experience when you knew that God was present? It might be one of those experiences that is rare. Maybe you have only experienced it once. Or maybe you experience that every day of your life. How did you feel when you had that experience? What was happening in your life? What effect did that have on you? Has it changed you in any way? Are you a different person because of that experience? What is different about your life now? The Transfiguration, the story we heard this morning, Jesus on the mountain, is pure mystery. It is one of those rare experiences. It was a numinous experience for Jesus, but also for Peter and James and John. They were there. Jesus was praying. All of a sudden, Moses and Elijah were there with Jesus. Now, these three men had walked with Jesus. They had learned from Jesus. They knew that Jesus had prayed, and they had been with Jesus prayed. But to be there when two men, long centuries dead, men that were mysteries of the faith themselves, appeared with Jesus. Why, that was one of those once-in-a-lifetime kind of experiences. Moses, the man who we heard this morning, had been with God. And God gave him the 12 commandments. More than once, actually. He came down off the mountain, and his face was aglow. So much so that his companions said, "You need to cover your face. You're so bright, we can't even stand to look at you." He had been with God. And Elijah kind of had that experience maybe all of us would like to have, you know? He never suffered death. God swooped him up in a whirlwind into heaven. He was the prophet who caused the people to turn themselves around and commit to the covenant of God that they had walked away from. These were the legends of their faith. And there they were, with Jesus, communing, aglow in the power and the presence, the shining face of God. Now, Luke includes this story for a very important reason. He wanted his readers to realize that, yes, Jesus was a great teacher. And Jesus was a great healer. And Jesus was a prophet. Jesus was special. Jesus was different. He had been set aside. And for Luke, this is the mark that Jesus is divine. Because Jesus is in a very different presence of God than anyone else has experienced. Now, some scholars suggest that this was an experience that Peter, James, and John had had after the resurrection. Jesus had been crucified, Jesus had been resurrected, and then they were able to have this experience with Jesus and Moses and Elijah. And so Luke, the writer, heard the story and put it back into the life of the Jesus who was walking on the earth. But Jesus was a mystic. Jesus was a holy man. Jesus had different kinds of experiences. And so I might suggest that Jesus' life was so unique that he could have had this experience while he did walk on earth. Something that would set him aside to be unique and different and very possible. But I also think the story has something for us today in the world we live in. Catholic theologian Karl Rahner has written this, and I love this quote, and it's really shaping my life. The Christian of the future will be a mystic or not exist at all. The Christian of the future will be a mystic or will not exist at all. Now, I don't think he's necessarily saying that we will all be mystics like St. John of the Cross or Teresa of Avila. But then again, maybe you are. I think the story has something to teach us about how God can empower us to be mystic Christians. The story teaches us that in order to be a mystic Christian, we need to be in the presence of Jesus. To be in the presence of Jesus. And God gives us a prescription for that. In this holy experience, when Jesus and Peter and James and John were there, they heard God speak to them. This is my Son, my chosen. Listen to Him. Listen to Him. Hear what Jesus has to say to you. So I want to give you an opportunity to have that experience. Today, I would like for you to, when you go home, take the gospel that we heard today, and find a nice quiet place. Maybe you have to go sit in your car to find a quiet place, but go find a quiet place. And read the text out loud. Now, you know, there's a lot of difference between reading something to yourself and reading it out loud. Now, you might say, well, that feels kind of odd to read it out loud to myself, but try it. Read it out loud to yourself. And then sit with it in silence. Maybe you can only tolerate the silence for 5 seconds. That's okay. Maybe you can tolerate it for 5 minutes. That's okay too. But sit with it in silence. And ask yourself then, what word am I hearing? What word do I hear? And then read it again, out loud. And then again, sit in silence. How much ever silence you can tolerate. And then ask yourself, what is God saying to me from this text?